Howdy, everybody. My name is Jeremy Flagg, and I am the owner and lead designer of Cover Villain. Over the next hour, we are going to talk about contracts and design briefs and try and demystify them so that authors have a better handle on the design aspect of their author business. I'm going to be stressing the importance of both of these and why they benefit you, the author, as much as they do the designer. So let's not beat around the bush and let's just hop right into it. So, what are these two things? A contract is a legally binding agreement between the author and the designer. We kind of know this. We're not entirely sure of all the things in it, but we get that there's a legal aspect to this. It's going to include the timeline, rights, finances, and all of this other kind of complicated language. And I'm going to jump into that and we're going to talk about contracts in depth. And for the sake of argument, this time, we are going to be talking about exclusive rights specifically for this presentation. And I want to make sure that we're not confusing that with full rights. And I'll talk a little bit about that and the difference between them. The design brief is a document that happens between an author and a designer. And this is all the creative notes that you're going to give your designer to help spark their imagination. No design brief or contract are going to be identical, but these are typically things that you should get from your designer. The contract for the legally binding side and the brief to kind of help that creative imagination for the designer and help align them to your personal vision. Most designers are going to require both of these, and if they don't, it can be problematic down the road and cause you a lot of pain and headache. So make sure that you are getting both the contract and a design brief. I cannot stress that enough. And if your designer doesn't offer one or the other, I might inquire as to why. And if you're not content with the answer, that's a red flag. And I think that you should probably run, not walk away from that ordeal. So let's just do a quick glance at what the sequence of events is when you hire a designer. Some of it's pretty straightforward. You're going to have your initial contact where you email and just ask, like, hey, I'm interested in a book cover. Is this something you might be interested in? It will then generally go into an informal discussion, and this might be through email. I like doing chat because I like to get to know my client a little bit. The more I know their personality, the more I can read between the lines when they say they might not like something or they do like something, and I get to know it a little bit better. The contract comes in even before we pay. And the reason, there's legal reasons behind this, but the reason is I need to make sure that you are aware of what you're getting yourself into when you work with me. And it's all spelled out in the contract, as clear as possible. And this is the document that's going to protect you on this journey as well as protect me. Then I'm going to ask for an initial payment. And once I have that, I'm going to send the design brief. Once the design brief is filled out, that I hop into designer mode and start working on the cover. You'll get some concepts from me, and then we'll start hashing out the revisions process. I break my revisions down into comparatives, and what comps are. They're just loose sketches of some ideas that I'm thinking of. There's no commitment. It's a great spot to say, I hate everything you came up with. And it kind of gives the least amount of time I can put into a comp is the best, because not trying to save me money, but I want the author to have the ability to say, I don't like anything here. Can you give me some more ideas? And I want, at this stage, I want the author to see a project and get excited for what's coming down the road. We'll do revisions multiple times along the way, and this could be in the sketch stage, this could be in the final stage, sometimes depending on how tricky a project is and how much I have to alter it based on stock photography. I might do middle process revisions as well. And then we're going to move into final payment. Once everything's paid up and we're all good, I'm going to send the deliverables, and then from there, you're going to publish your book, become a New York Times bestseller, and begin your life of world conquest. This entire process, the way I like to just kind of explain it is we're going to be dating. And I know this sounds kind of weird, and follow me on this, but we do kind of follow a relationship here. And I like to say that I have a relationship with my authors, professional, but we do go through all the stages. That initial contact is kind of the awkward, hey, will you go out with me? Passing the note in class. The informal discussion is that awkward small talk before we finally get dinner. And then we start getting into more serious stuff. And then by the end, we're talking about future projects together. So it is kind of like dating. And if you're not comfortable at any step of the process, it might be a good idea to break up. And this goes for both sides. We want working relationships at the end of this. All right. You don't need to write any of this down because it's all going to be in the PDF and you can download it. But here are the sections of my contract. And I do want to make it clear that this is my contract. I've worked on this. I've worked with a lawyer on it. So this is personal to me. And I can't speak for all designers on the specifics of a contract. But these are pretty standard. You should be comfortable knowing what they mean and kind of what the ramifications for you as the author. There's no such thing as a standard contract. It just doesn't exist. So just make sure that you have a loose understanding of these. And authors, I cannot stress this enough. Please read your contract. I worked really hard on this. I want you to read it. I want you to read it, and I want you to feel like it's a warm hug that is protecting you as much as it is me. Because this is, again, a partnership. But do make sure every time you work with a designer, you reread the contract because contracts change. And I have clients that I've been working with for multiple years. And over the years, my contract has evolved based on my business, based on my offerings. And there's always the inevitable, oh, well, you used to do this. Well, that tells me you didn't read the contract. So make sure you read it. And if something seems a little bit off or there's a change that you're unsure of, you have this working relationship. Be like, hey, this is something you used to do. Are you not doing that anymore? Can I get that in there? That's the conversation. And because we have a working relationship, absolutely. Let's try and make sure everyone feels safe and protected by the end of this. So here we go. We're going to deep dive into it. It's going to be a lot to read. So I'm not going to try and read everything to you. I'm not going to try and speak legalese. I am not a lawyer. But I am going to try and give you a brief overview of what you're reading and things that you might want to be aware of and things that should signal red flags to you. So let's get into the complicated stuff. In my contract, in the deliverables section, I state exactly what you will receive. I want this to be abundantly clear that at the end of this project, you will have these quote unquote tangible items that belong to you. What are they? This is what you receive once you pay, and it can change. Every project's a little bit different. Will this have ebook, paperback, audio? What file types? And if there's something weird that you think you need that isn't here, this is a great spot to be like, hey, by the way, I also need this thing. We might have to have a quick conversation about it, but ultimately, we, again, have a working relationship. We want to make sure that you walk away comfortable. Can it be a little bit of a hassle in this negotiation phase? Yes. But we want your business. And again, we want to be protected. You want to be protected. So if you have any sort of atypical need, and this can be, I need this book cover to also have a slight variation to it because it's going to be used for postcards. This would be a great spot to have that conversation. And be clear about what you think you will need down the road, because it might sound like a simple thing. Hey, I need the models with no background for a bookmark that I'm doing or a sticker I'm doing. It might sound simple, but from the design side, it can be really difficult depending on how we work on the file. And by knowing this stuff up front, we can make all those adjustments ahead of time, and it won't affect our streamlined process as long as we know up front. Some things are going to change, and eventually you're going to say in the middle, oh, by the way, I heard this great thing I want to do. Is it still possible? There's going to be two options for the designer. Hey, I think I can still do that. I'll just work it right in. Or I'm going to need to bill you extra because this is going to be me going back and doing this thing. So just be aware that that can happen. Again, great relationships. We'll try and bend over backwards to make you as happy as possible. So cultivate that right from the very beginning. All right. So we're going to talk about rights briefly. I've included another presentation at covervillain.com/romance where you can find more information about the type of rights. But I do want to cover it just a little bit because there is always a little bit of confusion when we talk about rights. I'm going to talk about exclusive rights. And this means that you at the end get the final files. This means they are flattened. This means they cannot be manipulated. There's really no options other than what's presented in front of you. This is not the same as the full assignment of rights. Full assignment of rights means that you are getting an editable Photoshop file at the end or an editable Adobe Illustrator file at the end. What this means is that you are receiving a file that can be altered. It is very, very different from a contract point of view. I cannot stress the importance of this distinction. In a contract, you need to make sure that you know what you can and cannot change. In my contract, I make it very clear. The customer is permitted to resize and crop the cover for their personal needs. Anything else, you have to come back to me and have a conversation. And again, depending on our relationship, depending on the schedule, depending on a lot of things, sometimes it's a very simple, oh, let me adjust that. I'll send you back the file. Sometimes it will be hey, there's going to be an hourly charge to make these changes. So just be aware of that and be aware of what you can and cannot change. I see very often authors tampering, and I say tampering as going outside the purview of their contract to alter things for bookmarks, postcards, taking fonts and titles off of things so that it kind of misrepresents the designer's work. And the best way I can describe this is this piece of the contract protects our integrity as an artist. And it's kind of similar as an author sending it off to the editor, and the editor sends you back potential changes that you can make, and you get to make the decision on what gets changed and what doesn't. This is the same here. You wouldn't want that editor to tell you, I made all these changes, this is how it's going to be from here on out. And especially if they changed your voice or changed the style or did something that made the designer look horrible or the author look horrible. We want to make sure that everyone walks away with a strong portfolio in their artistic integrity. So be aware of this. Some designers are much more constrictive, and then others are much more loose about this. So, and if you have questions, this is a spot where you can have that question. Licensing. I specifically work in photo manipulation, so I deal a lot with licensing. But licensing also exists for illustrated book covers, symbol book covers, or even typography book covers. And you need to be understanding of the licensing agreement of what the designer is using for third-party vendors. This just suddenly got a lot more complicated. So in my contract, I have built in what you can do in the limitations of your project. And the most common one is the maximum distribution cap of 500,000 print copies. This means that if you are at 499,999 physical prints of your cover, whether it be book covers and postcards, book covers, postcards and banners, whatever print, it means that you're about to move from a standard license to an extended license, and the designer has to go buy that for you. Good news is you can buy it at any stage of the life of this project. If you have just sold 500,000 print copies, buying an extended license isn't going to be a financial burden. It tends to run anywhere from $49 to $100. So just be aware if you do need that. And it is on the author to know how many quote unquote impressions of their printed book cover has been used. So to make my life easy, I like to use one stock photography website. I like using Deposit Photos. It has all my needs. However, if I decide to use a boutique shop, and there are a lot out there, either DAS models, custom photos, you'll see a lot for romance, period romance, kind of has to go boutique. What I will always guarantee is that whatever license I purchase from this boutique will meet the 500,000 minimum. And sometimes those licenses are extremely expensive. For period romance, just the one image of the woman in her Regency gown can be anywhere from $49 to $100. So it is an important conversation to have up front. And again, if you go over 500,000 copies, first off, congratulations, you've officially made it. You can always buy an extended license after the fact. Just reach out to your designer. If by chance a designer needs to buy some weird third party, either a font or a image, that needs to be noted. And that's generally a conversation that we have, and then we can rewrite the contract to include that. What I would like to start doing, and I will admit I don't do it yet, I would like to, at the end of a project, give my client a sheet with all of the stock photos used in their project, the name and location of where I got their fonts. And this way, if they ever want to do something branded like Facebook banners after the fact, they can either come back and hire me, or they can go purchase these things and use them on their own. Again, we want positive, strong relationships between author and designer. So sometimes you're going to want to work on a project on your own. Sometimes you're going to want me to do it so you can focus on the writing. So this is something I'd like to move towards. I think it's even better for the author in the long run. All right. We all hate talking about it. Money. Payment in a contract can include a specific amount. However, I don't like doing that. I much prefer doing a percentage. And my reason for this is it means my contract can adjust as my prices will vary. And this will subtly change between new clients and existing clients. For new clients, I will only give them the deliverables once I have the final contract, or once I have the final payment. And the reason for this is, just like every author is scared of a designer ghosting them, we're scared of you ghosting us as well. So we all have that kind of mutual fear, which gets alleviated because of the contract. However, if I have a positive working relationship with you, I will often send my files before payment because I know you're excited to start your Facebook campaign, get it up on TikTok, or you just want to get pre-orders up and going. Why wait the extra couple days to make sure payment's clear? So when we have positive working relationships, we can always do stuff like that. And I have to throw out there, clients who pay swiftly always get a little bonus. It might be as simple as giving them preferential treatment and scheduling, reworking things so that they have allotted time. But this is something that you want to keep in mind, that it is important to, again, foster those relationships. The one thing that I don't have on this contract that I have had to do is milestone payments. If we're going to do a 12-book project together, you might go 3 months without getting a product from me, and I could go 3 months without getting payment from you. And milestone payments allow us to set a payment every 3 books or every 2 books where you'll get the files, we'll get the payment. I'm always a little bit nervous about this because I don't want an author to think that there's the potential for me to ghost them when they're, 6 books into a 12-book contract. But at the same time, you need to move on and start making money on this project. So there's a conversation to be had there. And again, we want everyone walking away with warm, fuzzy feelings. Revisions. After 100 covers, I have only had to enact the 3 revision clause once. One of my existing clients that I am working on a project right now changes her mind on the daily, but it's in a manner that works with the flow of my process. This is our 8th book together. And so she knows when she can say something and it'll feed right in versus when it will actually be a true revision. But we have a great working relationship. And so I have no problem bouncing ideas back and forth. So this isn't a problem. This is where treating your designer with respect is extremely beneficial. I cannot stress this enough. If you are a person who needs absolute control on the project, be aware that this can cause friction. It can cause friction in the final quality of the product, and it can cause friction with the relationship. So my suggestion is let a designer do what they do best. Let them get to a comfortable spot and then let them show you their work. Because if it gets micromanaged, and I have had micromanaging authors before, it can be extremely stifling, and it can actually run very against genre trends, things that we're currently seeing as being marketable. Let the designer do what they do best and then pitch it to you. And that is a great spot for a revision. So make sure you know how many revisions are there. I offer 3. Again, never had to worry about it. And many of my clients, we do have more than 3. We bounce back and forth about extremely minute detail, and that is okay. We have a great working relationship. And make sure it's clear at when does this become a revision and what counts as a revision. Typos on my behalf, and I'll admit it did just recently happen. I forgot an S on a title. That's a me problem. That's me looking foolish. So that does not count against revisions. If there is an issue prior to the comp, when we pitch our big idea to you of where we want this project to go, there should not be backpedaling in a project all the way to the beginning. And this shouldn't happen because we've pitched you along the way and you've had chances to speak up. What I find often happens is there isn't that in the process revision stages, and we get to the final product and suddenly an author feels obligated to like something. I'll be the first one to say I always fear that an author feels obligated to like something because we're so far into the process. It doesn't make me feel good as an artist, doesn't make me feel good as a designer, and it doesn't make me feel good as a businessman. So this is something where at every stage of revision, the author should feel comfortable and empowered to have a real conversation about what is and is not working for them. We hate hearing feedback, I'm not going to lie, but it is part of what we got into business for. We do handle it after a little bit of a temper tantrum, which we do silently, not publicly. But you shouldn't always have to feel that you're saying, well, I hate being picky, but you're not being picky. You're being honest, and you're paying for a product, and we're delivering a product. There has to be that back and forth. The only time that this has become a problem for me is when I've had to state, and I did send an email that said, my professional opinion is the direction that you are pushing this project is not financially viable in the market. And I stated my case. I explained what the comparables were that we're currently selling and how this didn't meet that. And they said, we know, that's okay. And at that point, while I didn't feel warm and fuzzy about the project, it is ultimately their project. So I decided to go with it. And then at the end of it, we get to make decisions. Do they want to work with us again? Do we want to work with you again? And that's where, at that point, I decided I'd like to not work with this client again. No ill will, but let us do what we do, but don't ever feel bad about wanting what you want. And because we've already gone through the awkward dating together. We're already past the appetizers. We're well into second drinks. You can feel comfortable having these conversations. We're in that stage of the relationship. We're getting a little comfortable with one another. So feel free to steal the remote and watch the TV show that you want to watch. All right. Confidentiality. This is pretty straightforward. When can the designer share the artwork, and can they share the artwork? So I pretty much run by a rule of I won't share the artwork before the author does a reveal unless I specifically ask them. It's polite. It's good. A lot of romance authors like to do cover reveals. That's part of their business model. I don't want to be the one spoiling that. Even some of the covers that I have included on my portfolio in presentations, I make sure to explicitly ask if it's before that period. Afterwards, I basically say, hey, I get permission to put this into my portfolio. It's pretty straightforward. I'll use it for my own marketing. And at the same time, I like marketing these things because I can say, hey, look, I did this book cover for this author. They got pre-orders up if you're interested. Again, it's a working relationship. I want you to be successful. The more money you make, the more books you can write. The more books you write, the more books I design. All right, credit. This is really straightforward. How are you going to give attribution to the designer? I keep mine extremely simple. Cover by cover villain, my website. That's it. It's on the inside. Without a doubt, this is probably the most asked question. Hey, I want to make sure you get credit. Where do I put it? It's in the contract. It should be in the contract. And this is because some designers, extremely well-known, very, very popular designers, can ask for back cover placement, spine placement. I haven't seen anyone ask for cover placement, but it wouldn't shock me if it's out there. So just make sure you know that, because again, we just want to make sure we're getting credit, but at the same time, we want to make sure that you're comfortable with what's going on here. I have also kind of done an opt-out policy. If you don't want me using your book cover for my own marketing purposes, you don't want it on my portfolio for whatever reason, you can just email me and I'll take it down. No harm, no foul whatsoever. Just some people like their thing to be them. Also, some authors like to keep their cover designers a top secret. That way they don't get too busy, or so I've heard. Refunds. We're back to some money. So, I fully believe that there should be a non-refundable clause. In fact, I'm going to stake my reputation on it. The reason for this is I have done work up to this point. If at some point you say, I want to cancel the project, this isn't going according to plan, I have put in work so far. Either I think we can remedy the situation, or if you truly think that we need to break up and go our separate ways, then so be it. But I know at a breakup, let's be honest, one person always talks bad about the other. So I know if our professional relationship is ending, that you're going to go tell other authors like, hey, this didn't work out. That damages my reputation. So I put a non-refundable in there because We're going to go to couples counseling and we're going to make this project great. And if we got to go back to the beginning, let's see where we went wrong and fix it. Again, I'm going to stake my reputation on this. I'm a very proud designer, and I want to make sure that you don't like a cover. I want you to love the cover. And if we got to have another conversation, another round of revisions, we can do that. The other side of this is I kind of equate this to readers reading a book and returning it for a full refund. I'm sorry. Did a reader just read my whole book and then get all their money back? So we know that's not fair. Maybe they read 50%. Maybe they can get 50% back. I guess I would be okay with that. But we want to make sure that everyone is being paid fairly for work, even if not completion. And again, I personally am willing to stake my reputation on it. That is important in this industry. We all know that authors will very quickly say you might not want to work with them. So again, reputation is important. And that's why let's work through this and get to an amazing cover at the end. All right. Disputes are pretty straightforward here. Be aware what state the state the contract is valid in. This can be very, very important. I have had to have legal disputes with a former publisher, and they were based in a state where all protections were for the publisher and not for the author. So just be aware of this. I'll be honest, I don't think anyone in the history of author-designer relationships has gone and looked at dispute situations should they arise. We don't walk into a relationship expecting disputes. For me personally, I like to use the arbitration by the American Arbitration Association. We're not sure that we're a couple that should be together, so we're going to do some couples counseling. And the Arbitration Association has some rules on how we have to follow that. It's kind of straightforward. It's the 30-day period where we state our case, see if we can resolve it. We might even bring in a professional person to dispute it. And this sounds kind of foolish for a single book cover where it's a couple $100 one way or the other. But I've also had clients book out 12 books in advance. $5,000 can make or break an author. So you just want to be aware of how this goes. You need to be aware of what state, the schedule for the dispute, and the rules of the dispute before leading into legal action. So I have a 30 days, let's work this out before we get to the legal spot. Pretty standard. And last but not least, this super scary word, indemnification. And this basically says that if you, the author, go and do something extremely horrible that could damage my reputation, I can wipe my hands and walk away. By the same token, this contract protects you just as much. And we see authors getting slammed for some pretty weird things lately. We, the designers, I don't do a great background check into who you are and your social politics and your history. I'll do just enough research on your Amazon page so I'm familiar with you. But if suddenly something about you comes out and you're doing horrible things on Twitter, I want to make sure that those horrible things legally can't fall back on me. So that is important. Where we see this most often is with plagiarized books. We want to make sure that the designer is not being equated to that plagiarism. And the same thing, if a cover gets plagiarized, we want the author to be able to walk away. So just make sure that you are aware of that. This does not exclude things that the designer does wrong that come back on you. So what I mean by that is if I don't do my proper licensing and I completely disregard, I put in illegal things, I download intellectual property, I steal something, this won't protect me. I have violated my contract. So just be aware that while there are certain things that won't go back and forth, the things that truly matter do. Again, We want both sides to be protected with a contract. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to get into the idea of the design brief, where the contract is the legal binding agreement between us and what we need to be aware of in the entirety of the project. The brief is more about the creative side, the art behind a cover. So they are both important. I strongly recommend that all designers, and when I'm mentoring designers now, I make sure that they have this and they develop it to whatever their personal process is. This is basically a roadmap for us to understand your vision. It helps us take your words, your written art, and turn it into visual art. The contract protects the legal interest. This protects your artistic vision. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think that it's extremely difficult. However, what I see is authors are very quick to sign a contract, and then they're very slow for the design brief, because I want to know enough about the project that I'm making sure I'm representing it correctly. The design brief can be a little bit long and tedious. I'm not going to lie. All right, so we're going to go over each of these in detail, and it should be pretty obvious where we're going with this. So, due dates. There's a lot of things that go into consideration for a due date. And this is, when I say due date, I mean deliverable of the product. When does an author need the files for publicity? Do they need them for a pre-order? When do they think they'll be able to foot the remainder of the bill? This is extremely important because sometimes I like to push a project forward. I have a blank spot in my schedule, so let me hop on a new project. But just because I finish the project early doesn't mean I can bill the author early unless we have a conversation. So due dates are extremely important. And you will see that due dates can be pushed forward, but I am very, very adamant that a designer should never, under any circumstances, push a project back. They should never push a due date back, ever. Period. End of story. I've had this happen with editors. I've had this happen with beta readers. I don't like it when it happens to my writing. I never want to be the person that slows down an author. And this is because many of you have 2-year-long, very stringent schedules that you are following. And one item can quickly cascade into another. And I want to make sure that I am not causing you problems, especially because some of these problems can even involve having your pre-order privileges revoked. So this is something I am a firm believer of, and I wish all designers would follow this without reservation. If we are in agreement, if you come to me and say we need to move deadlines, I have to look at my schedule. You look at your schedule. We have to come to a mutual understanding on deadlines, especially after you've been booked for a slot. This is because a lot of us book up and we only take on as many clients as we know we can handle. So trying to move things around doesn't always work. So we have to be respectful of our time and your time. We are very efficient in prioritizing work. It's just part of the process. Many of us are working on multiple book covers at different stages all the time. So we just need to know when hiccups happen so that we can adjust accordingly. The more warning you can give us, the better. And just be aware that the due date isn't the same as the launch date or the publication date. Some people like to have their book covers 6 months in advance. They want to prep releases, they want to do pre-orders, they want to do cover reveals, whatever the reason, just make sure that it's clear what a launch date versus a due date is. All right, this is the technical stuff. This is kind of boring. These are the things that we need to know, and there's one key item in here that I think is very important. But we do need to know all of this stuff in advance. And the best example I have is we have designed this amazing book cover. You love it. You think it's the best thing ever. And suddenly out of the blue, you say, "Hey, can you add this tagline?" Well, crap. I did not design this book cover with free space for additional 2 sentences of text. Crap. How am I going to make this work? That causes problems. And that's something that should have been handled in the design brief. So if you're not sure of this, you can simply say, "Not sure. I plan on doing this though." And we can design around it. The other thing that we absolutely must need to know is how many books are going to be in a series. I cannot stress this enough, especially for someone who works with stock photography. If you want the same model on every book cover, I need to make sure that your 12 book series has enough stock photography that I can create 12 different covers. And what I do find is after the fact, when someone says, "Oh, we've got this 6 book series done, but I'm going to do 3 additional books," suddenly the designer's scrambling to figure out how to make that work. And this is where you'll notice often that there is a break in consistency on a cover. And it's because we ran out of photos. Unfortunately, it's not common, and I've tried it, to reach out to a stock photographer and say, "Hey, can you take more photos of this person?" I have had them say, "I have some extras that I didn't upload. Do you want to check them out?" But most often they'll say no or never respond. So while it seems super boring and technical, there are very important things. And again, this is why the brief is so important. All right, the creative elements here. This is what gets me excited. We as designers spend a lot of our free time researching genres, researching trends, researching tropes, researching archetypes. We are constantly looking at these visuals for inspiration. We know the genres we design for, and we know them extremely well. You can see this in our portfolios. Here, what we're going to do is we are going to take the elements of your book, combine them with these traditional genre visual representations, and make them unique to you. This is why this is so incredibly important. And while some of these things might not actually show up on a book cover. The clothes might not play an important role. The character description might not play an important role. But it is important for us to know this. And it's very obvious. A book with urban clothes versus tunics and pantaloons are going to be 2 very different book covers. So we want to make sure, especially those of you in Regency, I understand your strife that there is only so many models out there. We're getting creative and we are finding ways around it. So we need to know all this great information about your book. And I ask these very specific questions because these, for me, are what trigger my internal creativity. And these are the things that are important to you. And if you're going to spend the time working on them in the brief, I'm going to pull at elements. And it might be as simple as there's an important crystal in your story. It's what everyone is after. So how can I work that crystal into the cover? Or maybe a very specific sword is an ongoing joke in your story. Maybe I want to pull at that. Maybe there is something as simple as a dom-sub relationship, and I want to make sure I'm honoring that on the cover. Now, what I do have to put out there is when we are talking about this, we are talking about feelings, emotions, and tones. We are not always talking about physical traits. And I know, authors, you're going to all roll your eyes at me for this one, but no one cares about the color of the hair unless it is extremely important to the plot line. If your race of elves only has white hair, it is relevant. But your character on your cover being a brunette versus a blonde, I know that there is a reader out there that will complain, but I'm certain at this point that 99% of them don't even notice. So make sure that we are really pushing for feelings, emotions, and tone here. Don't get me wrong, if I can find a model with the correct eye color, hair color, all of that, I'll absolutely use it. But if I have to work around it, we might have to work around it. But again, I want this cover to evoke a story and a tone that the reader is going to be promised and you, the author, are going to deliver. There are limitations on what we can do with Photoshop. I know. It's hard to believe, especially as I'm currently chopping up a bunch of handsome gentlemen and turning them into gargoyles. There are still limitations. And I also want to stress, I always add in the must not have elements. And sometimes this is personal to the author. They just don't want something. And this could be as simple as maybe you're an author who doesn't want man chest on their cover. I'm sorry. I personally love the man chest, spending hours looking for man chest, assessing man chest, comparing man chest. Just saying, romance writers out there, I quite enjoy my job. But maybe your particular reader is not a fan of that. And if that's the case, say that. And if I feel it's extremely contrary to what the genre expects, I'm going to reach out and say, hey, I noticed you said you don't want this, but I'm seeing a lot of this in the genre. Is there a particular reason, or is there like what's causing this? And let's have a conversation. And again, this is a good designer making sure that we understand your project, we understand you, the author, and ultimately we understand your reader. Only you know your reader as well as you do. I know the genre, and we want to make sure that we're coming to a happy conclusion at the end. No pun intended. But just make sure that if there are things that you are adamant against for whatever reason, you say it. All right? And then I personally, and for no other reason than I want to see inside your brain, I always ask for either comp titles, other titles that you really like on Amazon, and then images of inspiration, one or the other. And my reasoning for this is most often, I just want to see how your brain works. I want to see what really gets you excited, what turns you on about these particular images. And because I'm willing to bet money that the things that are really stoking the fire here are the tone, the feeling, and those internal elements. And that helps me align to what you're doing. It also helps me with risk assessment. Maybe you're not comfortable having women in certain poses or particular setups. It just gives me that little bit extra, and ultimately it gives me a little more research so that when I go to the next designer or next project, I have a little bit more of what is going on. And if I see a lot of authors recommending the same handful of books, well, I'm going to need to do some research because I'm curious why this is such a big deal. So this ultimately helps designers calibrate to the taste of the client, and it can prevent pitching ideas that just don't hit. And again, we want to make this process painless and as seamless as possible for you and for us. So, and I'm especially in romance, I get to look at a lot more man chests. So what's wrong with this? All right. So ultimately, without a contractor brief, you're in danger. I never want a client to be hung out to dry. And unfortunately, we all know a story where that's happened. Either the designer has ghosted them, turned out a product they're not happy with, whatever. We want this to protect everyone, designer and author. Designers want authors to be successful. Your success is a feather in our cap. It's a bragging point, and a strong collaboration and working relationship is the bedrock of our business. We are in a service industry, and we want to make sure that those relationships are strong. Ultimately, we want you to get rich, do nothing but right, and you're going to keep hiring us over and over again. This is why we want to protect you legally and protect your literary vision. All right. If you have any questions on anything about contracts or briefs, by all means, shoot me an email. I love to talk to anybody about design, whether you're going to be my client or not. I want you comfortable being able to ask questions, and shoot me an email. No matter how much you think the question might be dumb, I promise you I have heard it before. And again, I always want authors to feel protected. That is the most important element here. So whether I'm going to be your designer or you're having issues with a designer, let's make sure that there's some open conversation, because I might not be your designer for this project. I might never be your designer, but you might know someone who you can refer to me. And these relationships are important, whether we've exchanged money or contracts. So shoot me an email and I will do my best to help you out. But otherwise, my name is Jeremy Flagg. I am the owner and designer of CoverVillain, and feel free to swing by www.covervillain.com, and you can get PDFs of this presentation at www.covervillain.com/romance.